guys, welcome back to the Puro Wrestling Academy. I am, of course, Mr. Ray Russell, but joining us is the man, the myth, the legend. Can you be a myth and really exist? I don't know. We're going to have to ask the Professor of Puroresu himself. Here he is, Mr. Dan Ginnetty. Welcome back. It's been a while, man, but I can't wait to jump back into things.
Yeah, summer break is over, and we are back in session. School is back in session, and I wonder if I can be a mythical legend or a legendary myth. I don't know how any of that works. So many clarifiers and qualifiers.
If you guys are wondering, you're in the wrong class.
That's true. Everybody's got one singular goal here, and that's to learn the history of Japanese professional wrestling and how crazy it is and how much it's just like regular pro wrestling. As far away as they could get it on the globe, there are so many elements of Japanese pro wrestling that are like current day wrestling. And that's what we're here to talk about.
Well, Dan, I guess we can't start until the bell sounds, so I guess you better make sure everybody's in their seat and we'll get rolling.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, class is in session.
Oh, man, here we go. 1958, I do believe, is where we're at this time around, Dan.
1958, and this year's a little bit different because we start the year with not one, but two television programs. Wrestling's being broadcast on two different channels right now, believe it or not. It's being shown on Osaka television, a show called Pro Wrestling Hour, and it's also being shown on Nippon television as Fight Men Hour, which was the first show that started. If you recall from listening to our 1957 broadcast, the main event, if you could call it that, was an exhibition with Rikidozan over 5 up-and-comers. And it was a strange format. I had never seen it before. But that's how the Fight Men Hour show started. And it kind of separates it a little bit from the Osaka television show. But we've got more information about TV. TV is what Rikidozan wanted all along, and he finally got it. And that was great for his promotion, great for the notoriety and getting his name out there. But I had recently discovered from a person's blog about Japanese pro wrestling television that he was receiving broadcast rights fees from Osaka television and Nippon television.
Wow.
I know, it was crazy. I know we had assumed in later days, and you'll all find out if you don't already know, but in the All Japan, New Japan days, Nippon television and NET, which would later become TV Asahi, would be paying rights fees to New Japan and All Japan every week for them to provide a television show for the network. And that was a huge source of revenue for those promotions in the 70s and 80s and 90s. Well, it turns out it was the same thing in the 50s, where Rikidozan's JWA was receiving between the two networks 450,000 yen a week because he had two programs on every week. And in today's dollars, that's $21,000. It doesn't seem like much, but when you multiply $21,000 by, well, if it were to make a complete year, you're looking at 1 million smackers going into the coffers of JWA, or more specifically, Rikidozan's pockets.
Well, I was going to say, let's see how much he pays his boys here as we continue through the year of 1958. I know there's a lot to get into. And before we do, Dan, as we've been doing in the last few episodes, want to run over some of the keynotes we're going to be touching on here in 58.
Oh, feel free. I kind of jumped all over that. So before we get too far into it, let's cover the high points so you know what to expect to hear over the next hour and a half.
Well, you talked about how successful it appears that television is right now for Rikidozan, the JWA. 2 programs right now. So JWA TV will continue, guys, until it doesn't. This is going to be the first instance of weekly Japanese wrestling TV being canceled here in 1958. It's coming up in the spring timeframe, I do believe. Also, interesting speculation on Rikidozan's absence following that period. Perhaps some illegalities involving finances. And you talked about all the money he was making. Where did it go? Is Rikidozan going to make another excursion off to the United States? Some say, well, we'll save it for later in the episode.
Yeah, we'll save that for later. But if you've been watching or listening to any of these shows, you already know that Rikidozan's never spent a full year in Tokyo, in Japan, and this year would be no different.
No, definitely not. And also coming up, the story of Thesz and the international title, not the NWA world title, but rather the international title. We're going to dive into that, Dan. You got some excerpts here straight from the Hooker Lou Thesz's book. Don't get excited, guys. I said Hooker Lou Tesz.
Yeah, for the purposes of this discussion, Hooker means a wrestler who knows legitimate submission maneuvers and can use them against his opponent in order to either protect himself or end the match really fast. These were legit shooter maneuvers, and a well-known shooter was also known as a hooker.
Correct. And a hooker, actually, I would say, is a level above a shooter. A hooker, man, they can cripple you permanently. And so they had no problem doing that a lot of the time. And Lou Thesz certainly, he learned from the best, right? And so Lou certainly had a lot of that in his background. And he doesn't use it here on Rikidozan. Spoiler alert, guys. But we're going to see those two go toe-to-toe on the West Coast here in the United States as we continue on. The international title on the line. Can't wait to figure out what happens in that matchup, Dan, when we get there in the summer of 58. But then finally, it's time for Rikidozan to return back to Japan. Another tour after taking months away from the JWA. They leave in March. He returns in September. It's going to be another tour September through November here, which also marks the return. More TV action at that point. And we're going to see the likes of Don Leo Jonathan, Handsome Johnny Barron, and Sky High Lee coming to Japan.
And the only thing that could make it any better is if we had the return of Jimmy Glarg.
Oh, will we ever see Mr. Glarg again? I can only hope. But also, before we get rolling here, I want to mention, too, Rikidozan going to take a brief trip to Brazil in the fall of 1958, and then he's back to Japan for tour number 2, which begins in late November and going to run all the way through January of 1959. Headliners on that show from the States, the very famous tag team from the time period of Tiny Mills and the Big K himself, Stan Kowalski. Not to be confused with Killer Kowalski, but Stan Kowalski, he had his fans, too.
He sure did, and we're going to get to see more and more of these American wrestlers coming into Japan that might be more familiar to you than perhaps some of the folks we were talking about from 1954 or 1955. I mean, I like Dan Pletches as much as the next guy, but when we start talking about Don Leo Jonathan and Lou Thesz, I mean, those guys have a lot of, they have a lot of support, and there are a lot of people who remember those characters in the world of pro wrestling.
Well, not to spoil anything, but I did look ahead a little bit into 59, and I do know at some point the Bulldog, Dan Pletches himself, will return for another tour. So for anyone, big Bulldog fans out there, no, don't you worry. In fact, even Lucky Simonovich is going to return in 1959. So, but that's a ways off. But as we close out 1958, Dan, we're also going to talk about Rikidozan. You talked about all this money he's been getting paid. Where did it go? Well, I don't know if we can answer that question. We can sure guess before we close out this episode.
At the very least, we can tell the listeners where the money didn't go.
Correct. And that's going to be to the talent. And we're going to talk about who comes into play here to save the day in regards to getting the talent paid, rather, at the end of the year. It's a very interesting story there. And if we have time, because this is, there's a lot of similar matches on these shows, not really going to run down every match on the tours. And so if we get into 59, just a quick spoiler here, the very first wrestling event shown in color on TV going to take place in the early part of 59. And we may even learn the identity of the masked Mr. Atomic, going to make his debut. Mr. Atomic hailing from perhaps parts unknown.
I was going to say that. Parts unknown or perhaps Malaysia.
Could be. Never know. Is parts unknown in Malaysia? I always thought it was.
It might be. I would be remiss if I didn't tip the hat to the late, great Kevin Sullivan, who popularized the speaking of the Abudadeen and such in that part of the Eastern Asian area.
Yeah, he got around over there, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, so many talent have passed away in recent weeks, and, we're back in a different time. A lot of these guys no longer here, that's for sure. And we're going to talk a whole lot about a whole bunch of them right now as we kick things off, Dan.
Sure. We'll start off with the first show of the year is January 3rd, 1958. And we know that because there is a live broadcast on Osaka TV, Pro Wrestling Hours episode. And it's all Japanese guys. There are no outsiders here. And it appears that the main event is a battle royal with 9 participants. It's so hard to tell because these are mostly undercard guys.
Yeah.
I see Michiaki Yoshimura, and Harold Sakata and Yoshino Sato in a tag match that looked to be the main event. But then there's a match after that, a 9-participant battle royale, and almost all the guys in it are undercard dudes.
I would have to think to a degree, and I didn't mean to cut you off there. I apologize. I'm just guessing here, but it's just based on the gimmick match, right? We're not seeing battle royals all the time here, so it's the spectacle of the match, I'm assuming, that's selling it as the main event.
Yeah, and this might be because it's on television. Almost nobody probably. This might be the first battle royal that's ever been televised. So that alone makes it a draw, even if it's not technically a good match or a match that people want to see twice. Just seeing it once, it becomes a spectacle. So the first time around, it's worth watching. But these are all undercard folk. At least everyone's getting work. And if you're on the undercard of the only existing Japanese wrestling promotion, is that a bad thing? Doesn't that still make you something of a celebrity? Because you're on TV?
And you're part of this crazy chaos that's in the 9 guys in the ring, and everybody's going 9-man battle royal. This is 1959, right? We didn't have 20-man battle royals all the time back then. Now, that became commonplace for the most part, maybe even the late 70s, but 80s and 90s, it was typically somewhere around 20 guys. And so that got so commonplace, that became too common. And it was like, give us some more, right? Let's add some more. And then the WWF would do 40-minute at one point and all that. WCW with the 60 guys and the 3 rings. But back then, 9 guys, I mean, most of the time when I would see results from this time period, just to put it in context real quick from everybody out there, most of the time it would be an 8-man battle royal because, again, the rosters weren't even that deep, really. But yeah, typically when you saw battle royals back then, it would be somewhere around 8 to 10 guys. And so 9 guys, that's a full ring.
Agreed. 9 guys will take up plenty of space. The one thing I don't have data for is I don't know if these are like the All Japan style battle royals where people are eliminated by pin as opposed to being thrown out of the ring. Mm-hmm. That information I don't have. I should preface the entire year of 1958 by saying that the results sometimes are spotty or non-existent. We might have the town, we might have a main event, but we might have nothing more than the main event. It is kind of a black hole in the history of Japanese professional wrestling. For good or for bad, the one thing that we have information on or know for sure is that the main event seemed to be the same thing every night for this summer tour that we're missing a lot of show info for. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but at least we know the main event because it's the same thing.
I agree with you as I'm looking through I don't know if you want to call this a tour, but the weekly wrestling that was going on here in the early part of the year, January through March, as you said, no Gaijin being brought in at this point. Outside of Harold Sakata, who, yes, he was originally from Japan, but I mean, he basically, made his home in the United States by this point. So he is visiting, so to speak, in regards to doing this tour.
Yeah, if anything, he's just visiting home. So I'm not sure I really consider him a traditional outsider.
Right.
So this tour can't cost a lot of money. It appears, at least from what I'm seeing, is that every show on the tour is a television taping, which means they're getting money just to set up the ring. They haven't even sold a ticket yet, and they're going to get some cash out of this. I don't think for this tour, I'm scrolling through really quickly, I think every single show all the way up through maybe all the way through March, I think, is televised. So it's subsidized by the networks, guaranteed to make money, regardless of how many tickets you sell, and you're not spending a penny on outside talent. So this is a way to make revenue. You may not make you're going to make profit too, but I just don't know how much without a draw from a Gaijin superstar.
And as I look at a lot of the shows in the first part of the year that we're talking about this tour from January through March, I see a lot of shows have 6-man tags, again, a battle royal elimination match, which appears to be a battle royal, simply just named differently based on what I'm looking at here. So it seems like they're gimmick matches. They're using gimmick matches rather than top draws in order to get people to watch TV here for the ratings.
Mm-hmm. And with so many undercard youngsters that are new to pro wrestling into the JWA, this may not be the hardest thing for Rikidozan to sell. Saying, listen, every show you're going to be on TV, you're going to get a chance to work, you're going to get a chance to be on TV in front of the whole world. What could go wrong?
Well, let's
be honest.
Don't worry
about money.
How many people were on TV in 1958, right? So everybody wanted to be on TV.
Exactly. I was going to say it was a brand new medium, and this is kind of like a sport. It is a spectacle. It is new. It is fresh. And it is still very popular. We move on to the TV taping on Saturday, January 4th, 1958. That one, again, is the similar format, but I'm finding that Yoshimura and Yoshino Sato are against Sakata and Abe Asamu in the main event. And you're going to see a lot of those guys, Yoshimura, Yonesato, Sakata, in the tag semi-main event before the Battle Royal. That trend seems to continue. We move on to Friday, January 10th, and this is Pro Wrestling Hour now. And same thing, the 10th and the 11th, it's like 2 days a week these guys are working, 17th and 18th. Mm-hmm. At least on the 17th, I'm seeing this was out of Osaka, and they only had 2 matches take place on the show, and and both matches aired on television. There was a Japanese junior heavyweight title match where Michiaki Yoshimura drew Yoshino Sato, and Osama Abe and Haru Sakata defeated Azumafuji. And I have Tama Nokawa. I'm not familiar.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with them.
I'm not familiar with him either. So
maybe we're going to see his name continue to pop up here, from what I can tell.
Maybe they're using him to, they're using this match to feature him since he's the only one that's kind of new. And this was an hour and a half, a 95-minute time slot for this TV show. And you only have 2 matches, one going to a draw and the tag match being a 45-minute best of 3 falls match. There's a chance that both of them go the limit.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me. I mean, think about it. You don't need any preliminaries when your show is the entire just 2 matches. So it makes total sense. And obviously those would be the 2 headliners, those specific matches based on who's involved. So they just cut out the fat on that episode.
Yeah. And going forward, if you notice, you're not seeing a lot of the battle royals anymore. So maybe there was feedback from the network saying, hey guys, enough of the battle royals. Okay.
Well, we've seen quite a bit. Change it up to 6-mans, and when they get done with the 6-mans, as I'm scrolling here, Dan, into February, I'm seeing an 8-man tag, so they got to bump it up. So we're still getting 8 guys out there, right? But it's in a tag team matchup. And who is beginning to referee some of these matches? Lo and behold, he's not wrestling on any of these shows, but Rikidozan, I've seen his name pop up now repeatedly as we go through February into March as what they're calling a main referee for many of the bigger matches. Yeah,
he referees the first 8-man tag match that ever occurs in Japan on February 7th, 1958 in Osaka. And that's about all you end up seeing of Rikidozan for that month of February. He is a referee, but he is not active in the ring. And why that is unknown to me. Maybe he just wants to give all of the other guys on the card an opportunity, a chance to shine and get over on TV, so to speak.
Well, you spoke too soon as I continue to scroll here, because fast forward a week later and we're back to an 8-man battle royale. They added an E there, so I got to call it a royale.
Cripes, that didn't take long. Did they do it twice? I see him on February 8th with the battle royale. Let's see about the 14th and the 15th. Yep, there it is again. Yep. Oh, my goodness.
And for anybody who really wants to deep dive like we are doing right now in regards to all of these results that Dan has put together, all you guys got to do is go sign up at the Patreon, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, that VIP superfan tier. You want to talk about detailed show notes. I call my show notes insanely detailed. Dan does deep dives, gets all this information, puts it together in wonderful documents here for me to read so I can make sense of it. And actually, I will go back. So you guys will actually, when you see the version that's on the Patreon, it's not just Dan's notes. I actually add mine in as well. So 2 birds, 1 stone, and there's plenty of information in there. Plenty is an understatement.
Yeah, we have so much data, so much information that is available, and a lot of it doesn't end up getting talked about because it's just in the body of the show. We make the show to flow in a way to make it more entertaining to listen to, but there's so much data and information out here. You can do your own research if you join the Patreon for this show, and it's nonstop information being added every week or every couple of weeks. There's so much stuff that we come up with, and I just tracked down information regarding television just 4 days ago. Television from 1958.
Yeah,
it's never ending. I'm never going to stop. Ray's never going to stop. Can't stop, won't stop. get the Patreon, become a Patreon member, and you're going to have access. We'll open up a whole new world for you.
And we'll have more on Patreon and the Puro Wrestling Academy here at the end of this episode, guys, so stay tuned for that. But right now, I guess we'll roll back into things. I don't know where you want to pick back up. We were on the 14th of February, I do believe, as we were scrolling through here.
Yeah, we still have special referee Rikidozan for some of these matches on the 14th and on the 15th. Another 8-man tag on the 15th. And the main referee is Rikidozan. And this one has Yusuf Turk is back. Yusuf Turk, Yoshino Sato, Nagasawa. And they're just mixing and matching. I'm not sure if there's a rhyme or reason, because other than the title match draw we already saw, there isn't much in the way of building up one person or the other. We did see a tag partner come out of the blue that is possibly being featured in the future, so that's good to see. But going to February 22nd in Tokyo, more of the same. We do have a handicap match with Azumafuji where he takes out he doesn't take them out. He wrestles Nagasawa and Michiaki Yoshimura. So that's interesting.
Good catch there.
Azumafuji is being put into more of these gimmick matches. So this is like throwing it up against a wall and seeing what sticks. I don't know what other kind of gimmick matches they could do. Is there a Triple Tower of Doom match in this tour?
Boy, that would be fantastic. If they just kept the cage sitting on the corner of the Ricky's dojo, that would have been fantastic.
Yeah, and they can have money at the bottom and see who makes it. Let's see. February 28th, 1958, out of Osaka. Only 3 matches on that card. That was only a 1-hour time slot for the show, but no championship matches there. And we make it to March 1st. Now, March 1st is the only show we have here where Rikidozan performs in the ring. And I'll call it performs because we're back to that workout deal that he was doing when the television in 1957 first started.
Right.
Where he would wrestle a bunch of undercard guys in exhibition matches, simulation matches. I'm not sure exactly how to take it other than a workout match where you just kind of work on moves and then kick the guy out and say, all right, bring me another one. And that gets us to March 1st, which is almost the end. We've got another week. March 7th and 8th, again, one show in Osaka, tape for TV, one show in Tokyo, tape for TV. And really nothing different than what we've seen before. Same guys, same lineup. And March 8th is the last JWA program that is going to air on Nippon television for a while. It was terminated. They had their run of 9 months. We don't have any information on why or how this show did not continue. I could guess. One is Rikidozan is almost not involved at all. He refereed a bunch of matches.
That was certainly my guess.
And maybe with pressure from the network, he said, Rikidozan, we need you in the ring. That's what people are here for, here to watch. And he gave them that one show, I believe, that was with the special performance demonstration, it was called.
He fought 4 guys. That was March the 1st. But I guess it was too little too late, Dan, right? I mean, it's like, okay, I'm back on TV, okay, but because it's kind of odd that they're canceled a week later. I believe March 8th.
That's correct. The program was terminated on March 8th. It did not continue after that. And now we're left to speculate why. Why did they go through a whole tour with Rikidozan, obviously in Japan, and being a referee for some matches, but not appearing on other cards or wrestling really at all? Didn't wrestle a single proper match. Well, we have information. And again, there's some degree of speculation to it. But I can tell you that Rikidozan's secretary, named Yoshio Yoshimura, wrote in his book, published in 1988, that Rikidozan had a reason for his absence in Japan. Now, I think he's talking about the absence in Japan that we're about to talk about. I mean, he's absent already and he's in Japan. He's not wrestling.
Right, yeah, he's definitely staying out of the ring.
He is not going to perform in a ring in Japan again until September 5th. And we're talking in March now. So for the next 6 months, Rikidozan is not going to be in Japan. And the secretary said the reason for his absence is that he had used black market money to pay American wrestlers. So he left Japan to escape being investigated by the Japanese police for a violation of the Foreign Exchange Act. So I don't know if it's money laundering or, well, black market money is essentially, it might as well be stolen goods because it's black market goods are goods that aren't regulated or possibly aren't allowed to be purchased.
I was going to say, I don't know how he got it, but we know it ain't legal, right?
That is true. And so he was basically on the run. And I wonder if this may also explain why he had a relatively low profile in January through March, where he wasn't highly focused or featured on his own TV show.
Yeah, because prior to, it's very un-Rikidozan-like to not be featured on his TV program or any other show that he was participating in. So all of a sudden we kick off the year and he's nowhere to be found. I did read some things that said that he might have done a commentary for some of those earlier TV shows in 1958. And then eventually he's back in the ring as a referee, and eventually he wrestles that, or whatever you want to call that 4-man demonstration that he had there at the beginning of March. But yeah, this story you have in front of you right here, I'm looking forward to getting your take on all of this.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this continues, I believe, from Rikidozan's secretary, the book that he wrote, that Rikidozan also at this time was wanting to avoid confrontations with the Japanese wrestlers who worked for him. He was very tight with his money. I don't know if that's the right phrase. I'm sure he spent plenty of money for himself. He was tight with paying the wrestlers, and he didn't pay them well, and he kept giving the explanation that he had to pay the American wrestlers too much. Now, for those of you who have a memory better than a ferret, which is about 10 to 15 seconds, you probably remember us making an observation of that entire tour, 2 shows a week on television for the entire months of January, February, and March. Mm-hmm. We noted right off the bat, what didn't they have for all 3 of those months on those cards? They didn't have any American wrestlers.
Right. It was very noticeable.
Who is Rikidozan having to pay? That excuse isn't going to get him very far when these wrestlers are looking for their money and Rikidozan saying, well, I don't have it because I had to pay the American wrestlers too much. Again, that was just an excuse because the only American wrestlers Rikidozan had used since November was Bill Savage and Harold Sakata. And Bill Savage was at the end of the year of 1957. Wasn't even in 58. And you have to add insult to injury the fact that since the weekly TV program had been terminated, there have been no wrestling matches in Japan. So how are the wrestlers supposed to make a living?
Yes, it goes off the air March the 8th. There are no quote-unquote house shows being done at this point. So there's literally no wrestling. I mean, we've faded to black in regards to wrestling events. And so these professional wrestlers are sitting in Japan and there's no livelihood to be made.
No, and maybe it's a morbid curiosity, but I'm a big collector of wrestling magazines, Japanese ones as well. I'd be very interested to see what was being put in the Japanese wrestling magazines during this time in 1958. There are no shows. Rikidozan is wrestling sparingly in other than Japan. We'll get into that very quickly. What are they covering in these magazines when there's nobody there and nothing happening?
Do we know for a fact, I mean, does he really have the market completely cornered to the point where there's no, what you would call outlaw promotions, no indie type promotions, just booking some of these guys? They're probably not making any money, but I'm assuming that there's so many different women's promotions during this time period, or upstarts, they're trying to get it rolling and things. I'm wondering if some of these guys just kind of move over to the side and say, well, let's go, here's a ring, let's go have a match. I don't know. Yeah, I'm just guessing.
All we can do is speculate. I don't have that information. Maybe I'll start a GoFundMe, see if I can't track down or buy some of these crazy issues from almost 70 years ago. They're not very cheap, but I would love to see if we could glean any info from them, because I'm curious to see what they would have covered for all 5 of these months where there's nothing going on.
Right. That's a long period. It's almost half a year, man.
It is if I made money publishing magazines about pro wrestling in Japan, and there was no pro wrestling in Japan.
Right. You got that right.
So obviously, without the wrestlers having any shows to perform on, they weren't doing very well. They were living in very poor conditions. And that's when some cracks started to form in the foundation of the JWA. And I'll explain what I mean by that. word got out that Rikidozan had sunk a great deal of money into his upscale apartment rental business, which caused a further delay in making back payments to the wrestlers. When they found that out, they were not happy.
I would imagine not.
14 wrestlers, which I believe is a good chunk of the entire roster, drew up a covenant with joint signatures and threatened to go on strike unless their situation improved before the next tour. Now, far be it from me to be a negotiator for a union or anything, but threatening to go on strike when no one's already working, I'm not sure that that's got the negotiating power that you think it does.
You know, just stepping back away from the story for a moment, I'm wondering what these guys, the other wrestlers, I wonder what they knew and what they didn't know throughout this entire process, right? Because TV's canceled March the 8th. There are no more shows. It just happens abruptly. TV is canceled. There are no shows. Okay, what do we do now? And then there's a tour in September. When do those guys even know that there's going to be a tour in September? I mean, I don't think Rikidozan had it planned that, well, if TV ran, we're just going to run TV from January through August, and then we'll do a tour in September. So it feels like these guys were just left in the dark one day. Oh, there's no TV at Rikidozan. I'm not saying he skipped town the next day, but at the same time, it's like, okay, they have nothing to do, like you said already. And then there's a tour in September. Okay, but when do they even find that out? So yeah, I can't imagine what all was going on behind the scenes. These guys trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And when they were even made abreast of this upcoming tour in the fall.
Yeah, I get these vibes, like these Paul Heyman vibes, where Rikidozan or some poor schlub that's Rikidozan's mouthpiece is constantly coming up with excuse after excuse to placate these wrestlers who are starving to death because they're not performing, they're not making money, and they're not on TV. And I just can't imagine someone saying, oh, well, he told me to come back in 5 months. I don't think that's how it worked. So I'm not sure how it happened. I certainly wouldn't want to have been one of those 14 guys signing the covenant, demanding work when there is no work, because it means you're just starving to death and you have no idea what's happening. I can only imagine the lies that were told, because at the end of all this, it's still pro wrestling. And I think that's probably how it's handled, is that you keep promising them the world so that they hold on hope, and then you're figuring maybe something will come our way where we can get this going again.
Well, Rikidozan at some point here, and I don't know exactly when he leaves the country of Japan, but as we already talked about at the beginning of the show, he does leave back to the United States, go back to Hawaii in the summer. He begins working there in Hawaii. And I know here in the notes you had, it says something about Rikidozan was like writing letters to the wrestlers from Hawaii, from afar, Dan.
Yeah, funny how he writes letters to the wrestlers while he's in Hawaii, when he was working with them and reffing with them up until the end of March, knowing they were going to lose TV, and didn't have anything to say to them then. It's interesting to me, but there is a letter that's addressed to a referee, Kyushuzan, and he complained that Yusuf Turk, who he referred to as a reckless undercard wrestler of Turkish origin, threatened to tell wrestling fans that Rikidozan was of Korean descent. And in that letter, Rikidozan told the group he would be winning the international title and things would get better when he returned. His plan was to set up an international tournament that would turn the business around financially. So again, more promises. I will say that if he spoke with confidence about winning this international title and bringing it back to Japan, a smart wrestler would figure, well, that's going to bring money, because that's going to bring high-profile outsiders to battle Rikidozan for that title. So that might have made me feel a little bit better if I was one of these underpaid wrestlers, knowing that if he comes back with something approaching a world title, then that can only mean money for us too.
Yeah, I'm just looking through the notes here in regards to his trip over to Hawaii. He's working matches, but he's clearly already got it set up what he's going to be doing with Thesz in Los Angeles. And as you said, he's making promises. I'm going to return with this belt, and we're going to set up some, I got some ideas for the not so distant future. So I guess at this point you have really no option but to cling to hope that this guy's telling you the truth.
Yeah, it's either that or quit wrestling and get a real job. And who wants to do that when you're, quote, a TV star?
Right.
You don't want to give up on it. So it's really, how long can you starve? Speaking of starving, the loss of revenue that was being paid by Nippon TV to Rikidozan put Rikidozan in a tight financial position. and he wanted to bring the NWA champion from abroad back. But what he really wanted was to win a major title. That way he has the title, so he doesn't have to beg and pay for a high-profile champion to come over to battle him. Now he's got the title, so he's got that cachet.
Makes sense.
And he knew he wasn't going to get the NWA title. Dick Hutton had it at the time, and that wasn't something that he was going to be able to get. He already knew that. So instead, he set his sights on Lou Thesz's international title. And he figured defeating a former NWA champion would still give him quite a rub. And knowing that and planning for that, he flew to Los Angeles to see matchmaker Jules Strongbow, who was said that he could arrange that title match for him at the Grand Olympic Auditorium. So this is good news for him. Rikidozan's got a plan. He says, I can't get the NWA title, but maybe I can get Thesz's international title, which is still going to be super high profile. Come back that champion, hail the conquering hero, and then they have to come to see him, but he's going to have a lot more notoriety holding that belt. And this is where we transition to part of Lou Thesz's autobiography called Hooker. And in that book, Lou said he created the international heavyweight title for himself so he'd have a belt around his waist when he went to Europe. Just 3 weeks after he dropped the NWA world title belt to Dick Hutton, he went to London, England. And on August 27th in Los Angeles, Rikidozan defeated Lou Thesz by disqualification in what was billed a non-title match. Surprisingly, the headline in the Los Angeles Times results column the following day read, Nandor Victor in Matt Feature, and a short description was given of Bob Nandor Count Billy Varga match. On the other hand, all that was said of the Thesz-Riki match, which was much more important, was Rikidozan decision Lou Thesz. So that's weird that they buried the lead there in the Los Angeles newspapers. They didn't even mention it. And I wonder, with the ties to promotional outlets like wrestling and the local press, if that might not have been discussed when reporting it, saying, yeah, you can put it in there, but kind of bury it. Don't feature this. I don't really want to advertise the fact that I just lost my international title. Because at this time, Thesz had been a major superstar for almost 20 years. So he could have talked to the press at that show that went to report the results and say, hey, don't go crazy talking about losing my international title, will ya?
And it may have been a disqualification, but still a huge win for the time. Rikidozan coming back for basically a one-off here in Los Angeles against Lou Thesz and taking the title. Even though it was a quote-unquote non-title, Rikidozan got a return to Japan as the international champion.
And part of what makes me believe that Thesz might have had some local influence regarding the local paper covering the show is that the match itself generated a lot more newspaper coverage in the days that followed. The AP and UPI, Associated Press and United Press International, caused a considerable stir in Japan by reporting that it had been a non-title bout. The various newspapers said different things about the controversial match. On his return to the airport in Tokyo, Rikidozan had to explain to the reporters that it really was a title match, and he did win the international title by disqualification. When asked why he didn't have the belt, he said the physical belt belonged to Thesz and he could not afford to buy it.
Why would you say that out loud, even if it were true?
That's weird.
And if you're champion, why would you buy the belt? Why would you have to buy the belt?
Exactly. It lessens the importance of the belt.
Yeah, if
when
Lou
you
owns
realize,
it, what does it really mean?
Yeah, it's a toy of Lou's.
It's like the $1 million title.
Why would you make the belt mean less and that is just somebody's toy that they bought?
So at this point, Rikidozan's only Virgil actually got the belt.
That's true. I liked Virgil. That was a good turn.
That was a great turn.
That was a great turn. The crowd, oh my God. What was that, 1989, 90?
91, Rumble 91.
God bless us. The fans still cared about the right stuff. That was the same year that Savage had the retire. Was it the retire match?
Yes. Yep.
Oh my gosh! When they had that picture of the girl in the crowd crying, that was legit a moment for all the crazy stuff Vince did. He did like 4 or 5 things that are like unbelievably important. Yeah. And I thought the crowd absolutely went ballistic for that.
Yeah, good stuff. Good storytelling.
Yeah, in
And
1991.
Rikidozan's a pretty damn good storyteller, too.
He is a good storyteller, and it's a lot older than 33 years ago. So Lou does refer to Rikidozan's desire for this title in his book, The Hooker. Quote, Japan became especially important for me during that period. This is Lou Thesz speaking. I can make a couple of tours each year wrestling Rikidozan and his top boys and pick up several $1,000s each trip while not having to lay out a dime in expenses. I was able to fatten my pocket in another way, too, because I had been smart enough to bring my international title back from Europe, and Riki wanted it. I'm proud to say I actually made the international title mean something, especially in Japan. Of course, the U.S. promoters helped since they couldn't have the NWA champion every week. They were only too happy to promote the international title when I appeared for them. In places like Texas and California, the title became a very credible one. But it was in Japan where the title carried the most weight. Rikidozan coveted it, and a reason a major title would only enhance his superstar status at home, and he knew he wasn't about to make a deal with the NWA for their belt. So that takes us into, before we start that September tour, let's just talk about some of the matches that Rikidozan had while he was outside of his native land. And to do that, we're going to start with a match, which is, let me see where it is. I have the first one is July 6th in Honolulu, Hawaii. He was in a 6-man tag with Kokichi Endo and Toyombori. Hey, I remember those guys. They weren't on any of the shows from January to March.
They've been hanging out in Hawaii this whole time. They've been there since last year, I do believe.
Making money, too. And they wrestled the team of...
Yeah, there's actually shows in Hawaii.
Yeah, amazing. They have a promotion that's active. Sky High Lee, Tom Rice, and Stanley Kowalski.
We're going to see some of those names again. Wow, okay.
Funny how that happens.
Isn't it?
The next week on July 13th in Honolulu, Hawaii, Rikidozan defeats Stanley Kowalski. The week after, he draws Sky High Lee. And on August 3rd in Honolulu, he teams with Toyombori versus George Bolus and Sky High Lee. August 23rd in Long Beach, California. He's now gone from Hawaii to California. He has a warm-up match against Jim LaRock, which I'm not sure who he is, but he gets beaten by Rikidozan anyway. And then the fateful August 27th match in Los Angeles, California on TV. Rikidozan technically defeats Lou Thesz by DQ, and in doing so wins the International Heavyweight title. And the goal, the thing that Rikidozan had been searching for so long, he finally gets the international title. Now, it's not a physical title, as we have just discussed in his, press conference or interview he got after returning to Japan. Mm-hmm. But it's the next best thing. The belt is coming to Japan.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the Professor of Puroresu, Mr. Dan Ginnetty. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron. I'm talking about that $5 all access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. We also offer remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. And for those who like all of their podcasts in one nice, neat little pile, the WrestleCopia Patreon also offers a Patreon exclusive Spotify account. You can actually go over to your Spotify with your WrestleCopia Patreon credentials. Instead of listening or downloading directly from Patreon, you can go over to Spotify, listen to all the latest shows, including all of the early releases. And you get all of that and so much more for just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
So that takes us to the September tour. And the September tour starts on September 5th. It would go to November 4th, 1958.
And I believe this is where we're going to see some of these American talents heading over, including Sky High Lee, who clearly worked with Rikidozan quite a bit there in his little brief tour of Hawaii. Sky High Lee going to be there. This is Handsome Johnny Barron coming in, I do believe. And the Mormon Giant, Don Leo Jonathan.
Don Leo Jonathan. This is a guy who was, I don't know how tall he really was, but they claimed he was 6'9", and could do kip-ups. He could do drop kicks. He was an amazing athlete and super big. One other thing we should talk about, with the advent of all of these high-profile Americans coming in to wrestle in Japan, another thing would return to Japan, including Rikidozan, but also television coverage.
Oh, how about that?
On September 5th, Friday, a 1-hour time slot, Nippon TV once again begins to televise pro wrestling cards, and the matches would air every other Friday. And this would continue for, almost 3 years. So now they've got a time slot every other Friday on Nippon TV from here on out for the next 3 years.
So it's not
we don't
weekly,
have any.
But bi-weekly, they know they got some work coming ahead. And I mean, they don't know that it's not going to be canceled, but we know for at least the next 3 years, we're going to have some solid TV here on Nippon.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, I also say the reason why it's every other week, every other Friday, is the Friday that wrestling does not air, the World of Disney. If you're old enough to remember Sunday nights where I grew up, they used to have the Walt Disney Hour, and it would show cartoons and all this other stuff. This show was also popular in Japan, and every other Friday night, you had the Disney
Lots
television
of damn
show.
Haley Mills movies, I'll tell you that.
She was popular. She's not still alive, is she?
I don't know. Miss Bliss.
I don't know. She should be in the new Freaky Friday movie. They're doing another Freaky Friday movie,
man.
by the way.
Just keep Lindsay Lohan out of it. I'm good.
She's in it.
Oh no.
Gosh.
I should have known. I can afford her now.
I didn't find out on purpose. It just happened to come across a Twitter feed or something.
I got
All right, so let's see what we have. September
fucking
5th.
Twitter.
It's the worst thing in the world. We've got only two matches there, and this is a non-title match, another non-title match, Mishiaki Yoshimura versus Yoshino Sato, and the main event, tag match, 60 minutes, 3 falls, Rikidozan and Johnny Barron against Don Leo Jonathan and Sky High Lee.
And it looks like most of the tour, that's pretty much the main event throughout.
Yeah, you've got it. Any kind of permutation the next day that's not televised. Rikidozan's against Sky High Lee. Don Leo Jonathan beat Johnny Barron, and they would work these guys around, but it's always the top 2 or 3 matches are going to include all of those Gaijin outsiders. And we get some of these shows where all you have is the main event, Rikidozan and Barron versus Jonathan and Sky High Lee.
Several times.
And it's just a lot of the same thing. I'm going through. I've made it to the end of September. I do have the second television show. It's every other week. So let's see what aired on September 19th. I'm super excited. Could it be something different? Kawasaki. City, 1 hour time slot. Are you kidding? It's the same thing.
It's the same results. No, wait a minute. Who went over the first time? Who went over the last time?
Man.
Sorry, Dan.
I'll have to look. No, it's just scrolling up. My Word document is actually on WordPad.
Must have been a rainy September in Japan. I see a few shows even canceled. They were rained out. Must have been outdoor.
Yeah, and one thing with these is that the rainouts here don't say anything about a reschedule.
Yeah,
all the rainouts prior to this were rescheduled. So
yeah.
Let's see. September 5th, I'm going to look at the results. And, of course, all I have is the draw for the main event, for the tag match. I have nothing about Yoshimura versus Yoshino Sato.
Okay.
So I don't have the results.
I'm sorry about that.
This is what we were talking about.
We're going to get that tag. We're going to get that tag match again on the 19th in Kawasaki, though, as well, that Jonathan and Lee, they're going to go over. The heels are going to go over. So I'm guessing Barron does the job in that one.
That's my guess. I do see on the 23rd, September 19th. Yep, I've got that. They do beat him there. I'm moving on to the next TV. We've got main events, but they're all the same main event. There's more results for the 29th of September, 1958. We've got some undercard matches, but again, the top 2 matches are Yoshino Sato versus Yoshimura. At least this one, we know Yoshino Sato beats him. And then in the main event, Rikidozan and Johnny Barron draw Jonathan and Sky High Lee. We're moving on into October now. Again, more results, more complete results. October 2nd is an important match. October 2nd is the first defense of Rikidozan's international heavyweight title match. It's not on television, but Rikidozan does defeat Don Leo Jonathan.
I mean, if you're going to go to the trouble of beating Lou Thesz for a belt, you should at least defend it, right?
Yeah, I would say so. That's fair. Let's see if he has something here. On October 3rd, there's a live broadcast, so you only missed it by 1 day. If he had the television show taping on the 2nd, they could have seen an international heavyweight title match on TV for free.
Maybe Jonathan didn't want to do the job in the singles on TV. I don't know.
Especially on TV. Probably wasn't a fan of that. The format of this television show is a little bit different because the semi-main, there's only 2 matches on the television show. Azumafuji versus Johnny Barron, and Azumafuji would lose to him. And then the tag match, best out of 3 falls, Rikidozan and Johnny Barron.
Right.
Versus Don Leo Jonathan and Sky High Lee.
Double duty.
Huh.
And I have that in 2 different versions of my results, so I'm assuming that was actually accurate, not a typo. And it makes sense main event-wise, the story they've been telling. The first time on TV, the 2 teams go to a draw. Last time on TV, it was the heels going over. And finally, this week, the 3rd time, if you're going to keep bringing the match back, at least change it up and the baby faces finally going over for the first time here in those tag team mains.
Yeah. Far be it from me to book this show, but if you're going to have Johnny Barron beat Azumafuji in the semi-main,
right,
Rikidozan and Johnny Barron defeating the other two in a best-of-3 falls, I am hoping that Barron took the fall for the Rikidozan team because he would theoretically be more tired since he had just wrestled a match before.
Well, that would definitely make sense, especially not just working twice in the top 2 matches, but 2 matches in a row on top of all of that. So, yeah. It's kind of interesting, the booking there for Johnny Barron. I don't know if there was somebody else in mind for that Azumafuji match and something happened. I'm not really sure how that played out, how that booking went.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's stories within stories here, and we don't even know how it all went down. But this looks a little out of the ordinary to me. It's almost like somebody was sick, but I don't know who it would have been based on the Gaijin that were there. Or maybe it was Yoshimura was injured, so he couldn't have just another match against Yoshimura as the semi-main on the TV. So they had Johnny Barron do double duty. That gets us through the 3rd of October. We move to the 4th. Again, nothing exciting going on. More of the same. Rikidozan draws Don Leo Jonathan in the main event in Osaka on October 4th. We don't even know the results from October 5th in Ono. We know some results for October 6th, 7th, 11th.
By the way, most of those are all the same main events. Heels going over, baby faces going over. On the 11th, there's a little change up here. It's actually Tainobori back from Hawaii, finally, teaming with Rikidozan over Don Leo Jonathan and Sky High Lee, which leaves Johnny Barron free, this time doing the job to Azumafuji on October 11th. So even though we're not at the tail end of the tour, it's beginning to feel like we are, as all of the Gaijin beginning to do some jobs.
That's correct, and it's nice for Azumafuji to get the win back from Johnny Barron. I want to scroll back just a touch because I want to follow, if we are to believe the television, October 3rd. So we're looking for the 17th to be the next TV taping. There it is. I just found it. On this one, it appears that there is only one match on the October 17th television episode for the entire hour.
It's a doozy, man.
It is certainly a doozy in Fukuoka City, Fukuoka Prefecture, Fukuoka Sports Center, live Fukuoka broadcast. 6-man tag, best out of 3 falls, Rikidozan, Azumafuji, and Toyombori versus Don Leo Jonathan, Sky High Lee, and Johnny Barron. So that is
Barron
a barn burner.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, well, he had to be featured in the main event somehow. So now that Rikidozan has got Toyombori back, he doesn't need Johnny Barron anymore.
I was very curious how they were going to play this episode of TV after we'd done every finish we could with the 4 guys. Let's add a couple more. And Johnny Barron gets kicked over to the heel side here, working against Rikidozan and crew. But yeah, that's a hell of a match for TV. You'd say it's just one match, but man, what a match it is.
Yeah, I can imagine that being super exciting, and the fans get to see one really long-form match. If it's executed well, this is going to be something people talk about the next day. And we should take note that Toyombori had been away from JWA for over a year.
It's got to be close to
almost a year. He was gone like at the end of last year, and it's already October, and he's finally coming back. So he's been getting a lot of seasoning. I know some people aren't overly impressed with his ability in the ring, but it wasn't for lack of experience. He was getting tons of matches in
they were
Hawaii during this
trying to
time.
get him into the groove of things, and obviously we all know his career is not quite as long as many others, but during this period they were doing their best to get this guy over and get this guy ready. Yeah,
the only groove of things that Toyombori really excelled at was gambling on anything possible.
Boy, he'd love it today. He'd be broke in 5 minutes.
Oh, easily. He would be a poster child for what not to do. He remind you of some of those NBA players who somehow blew through $200 million over their career.
Only 2? Oh, man.
Yeah. Let's see. October 28th, Rikidozan and Toyombori defeat Jonathan and Sky High Lee. This is in Gifu. We almost have the entire card there, but it's more of the same. Azumafuji beating Johnny Barron again. He's really taking out his frustrations on poor Johnny.
I see for the comments made about Yusuf Turk in the prior, he's still working some of these shows.
Yes, he's still kicking, still around. I'm wondering when Tanaka's going to be back. I do have a note about what I believe to be it's the Halloween episode. I wonder if they dressed up. I wonder if they made it like WCW when Nitro was on Halloween.
I still remember that Saturday night's main event, like Miss Elizabeth in her jungle outfit. Pretty cool.
Oh, yes. That was hard to forget. That was 1985?
85,
correct?
yeah.
Yeah, because I had just gotten cable that summer where I lived, and we got a VCR as well. So I recorded that Saturday night main event in 1985 and have since lost the tape, of course.
I still say Iron Sheik. Well, I guess there would have been copyright issues. I was going to say Iron Sheik and Nikolai should have kept those Batman and Robin costumes. They would have been over for another few years.
It was it was kind of an extension of the Tuesday Night Titans, how crazy some of those skits would get on Saturday Night Main Event. But it was an entertaining show. Like
sports
a
entertainment, pal. Exactly.
Oy, oy, oy. Very much so. This is not sports entertainment. This is real live wrestling, October 31st, 1958 in Tokyo Metropolitan Gymnasium for the international heavyweight title. Rikidozan again defeats Don Leo Jonathan. Now, there's some notes about this. There's some details about how this match ended. Jonathan would forfeit the match due to an inflammation of the middle ear. The inconclusive ending of the match made both spectators, there's only 2 spectators, probably both of the wrestlers somewhat frustrated. So I don't know if he noped out of the match because it was on TV and he didn't want to look weak, or maybe he had some kind of inner ear deal. And if you don't have balance, the last thing you want to do is be running around smacking people. So there's clouds of controversy in the finish of the Rikidozan Don Leo Jonathan International Heavyweight Championship match. The other match on that show would be a tag match, a 3-fall tag match. Azumafuji and Toriumbori event against Sky High Lee and Johnny Barron. So again, all the Gaijin are involved in the TV show, maximum exposure.
And that injury had to be somewhat of a work because the very next day, Jonathan back in the ring November 1st.
It's kind of like being turned into a newt. He got better.
Okay.
If you were familiar with the Monty Python movie.
Love the references, man.
Okay.
Somebody gets it out there.
I'm like a poor man's Dennis Miller. Let's see. So we do have him wrestling the very next night, November 1st in Fujisawa in the main event tag team. And I have some notes about Don Leo Jonathan after this tour. He did consent to an interview shortly before he returned to the U.S. and he said, quote, "I got the impression that Japanese fans stick too much to the results of each match. They only want to know which wrestler is better and who is the loser. American fans attend our shows to enjoy watching wrestlers' performances, both good guys and bad ones. Japanese fans are too serious. They should give a good appreciation to the techniques of wrestlers, even though they may be heels from abroad."
He gave this interview in 1958. This is kind of breaking kayfabe a little bit here. All the Japanese fans are taking this sport seriously when they should be enjoying the performances of the wrestlers.
And that's a quote. That's dangerous.
Yes, that's walking a fine line, that's for sure.
I agree with you there. I'm kind of surprised that he used those specific words, but maybe it was something lost in translation. We do know that Japanese fans appreciate technique above all else, but coming out of World War II, this is only, 13 years after the end of World War II. Maybe for them, winning is more important than absolutely anything at this point, just to get wins, if you know what I mean.
Well, you go back to the jiu-jitsu, you go back to the sumo, it was all about who was going to get the victory, right? It wasn't just about the performance per se. And I'm sure there's footage out there. People are enjoying Rikidozan throwing those chops, right? So they're eating it up. So they do enjoy the performance to some degree, at least when their favorites are on top, which is the same worldwide.
Agreed. I mean, there is a visceral enjoyment of watching the good guy smash the bad guy, just for the spectacle of it all, I guess, is the best way to say it.
Sure.
So after this November tour, Rikidozan would leave Japan for Brazil, accompanied by Yoshino Sato, and they were invited guests at a celebration of the 50th anniversary of immigration to Brazil. 50th. interesting. They got a rousing welcome from about 3,000 Japanese immigrants at the airport in Sao Paulo on November 10th. They worked with local wrestlers in Sao Paulo and other cities for the entire month. They left Brazil after Rikidozan went to a draw with Ionius Constantino Costolius, Johnny Costas.
I recognize the name, and then I see who it is. I said, oh, okay, I've seen that before in my results, so that made a little more sense.
50. So that means 1908 began the immigration from Japan to Brazil. They must have set up some kind of agreement. I always thought it would be something more related to the war ending. Now, maybe It ramped up after the war because of the condition Japan was in, but I thought it might have started then. But this is saying that it started 40 years or 30 years before the World War II even started.
Well, this is kind of interesting, too, time-wise, in regards to Rikidozan's trip over there, because he goes over there November 10th. He lands in Brazil, and they actually start up another tour in the middle of that time period on November 21st. And Rikidozan is indeed missing in action for the first part of that tour, and we're going to go into that in just a little bit. But as you're talking about them being over there, I just noticed the dates, and I'm doing the math. I'm like, was he over there for a full month just enjoying the Brazilian ladies, the Brazilian lifestyle, and just kind of kicking it back? And again, all the guys are going, where's Rikidozan? Where's my money?
Yep, where's my money is a very good question and a valid one, too, especially after the big tour they just had with the international title being defended and all that stuff. The tour in Japan technically starts on November 28th, and we'll start here at the beginning. Where else would you want to start about the tour? I just want to make sure I have all the info here. So it starts on the 21st, not the 28th. My bad.
It looks like it was supposed to start on the 14th in regards to these notes here. And these are your notes, Dan. But it says the original tour date of November 14th was canceled due to a clerical error, because two of the headliners, Tiny Mills and Stan Kowalski from the States, failed to obtain their working visas in enough time. So they actually postponed the entire tour until they can get some of their headliners.
Yeah, that does suck, because it looks like they were the only two outsiders that were coming in. So when they can't make it, how do you have a tour?
Especially with no Rikidozan in the early part of the tour.
And Ray, how dare you hold me accountable for my very own notes? Who do you think you are? So obviously the November 14th show doesn't happen, paperwork issues, and that would continue through the history of wrestling. We've heard that a bunch of times.
Sure.
A number of reasons why guys didn't make their shot was visa issues.
I just look at this and think how much more of a train wreck this could have been, because we're going to get into it here in just a minute. I believe there's some notes somewhere in here, if I remember correctly, when I was going over this, that until Rikidozan returns and joins this tour, it's not doing so hot without him on the cards. And so think about that. They skipped an entire week of this tour just to get Tiny Mills and Stan Kowalski on board by the 21st. So they could have had another full week of just terrible, terrible business.
Yeah, as if the workers weren't mad enough already. Now their entire tour is delayed another week because they don't have anyone to wrestle.
Well, it doesn't matter. They're not getting paid either way.
Fair point. So there is a live broadcast for the first show of this tour, November 21st. And it features the semi-main of Michiaki Yoshimura defeating Yusuf Turk. And the main event is a non-title tag match with Azumafuji and Toyombori versus Stanley Kowalski and Tiny Mills. And that's where the note that I have is that at this time, attendance was at an all-time low because, shocking, Rikidozan isn't there. Nobody but Rikidozan had the ability to attract a large audience. There was some confusion in the JWA publicity. Newspapers were featuring pictures of Killer Kowalski, not Stanley Kowalski. So that might have been a little bit of a surprise.
That's not the same guy. What did they, Jack Pfeffer us?
Yeah, what is it? Bruno San Martino?
San Martino, yeah. Hobo Brazil.
There's another note here about the accommodation. Hobo Brazil.
That's legit, man.
It is. I've seen the posters. It's so funny. Wrestling is so funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
Here's a note about how they treated the foreigners when they were coming over for tours. The JWA generally provided a high-class hotel for guest wrestlers from abroad, but it was reported that the JWA couldn't afford to do so during this tour. So Tiny Mills and Kowalski stayed in an apartment house owned by who else but Rikidozan in Tokyo, because he's getting into the apartment complex business. So he just let them use one of his empty apartments.
Well, I mean, I guess it could be a whole lot worse than that.
True, but I think this note is to express the deviation from the norm on how the outsiders used to be treated compared to how things are going now.
Oh, no doubt. Instead of putting these guys up at a palatial estate, they're gonna. Oh, I got some rental properties over here. They're not furnished, but you guys can throw some blankets down and have a good time.
Yeah. Hey, let me knock on this door. No, this apartment's empty. Here, have this. Bye. Gotta go. We go to November 28th, and we're in Tokyo Korakuen Gymnasium. This show is also televised, and it's got Toyombori versus Kowalski and Azumafuji versus Tiny Mills. And the note from this might have been Azumafuji's last match.
Wow.
On November 28th, 1958.
Yeah, we're going to get to why in just a little bit, I feel.
Well, it's already almost in December, so we don't have too much of 1958 to cover. We're about to get to it. December 17th, nothing major. Rikidozan and Toyombori defeating Kowalski and Tiny Mills, and that continues to happen. We're not seeing Azumafuji anywhere on these cards.
So,
make it to December 20th, same thing.
Before we get into the story you're about to break open here, do you notice Azumafuji seems to disappear when Rikidozan returns to the tour? Do you think he was just holding down the fort for the rest of the guys and just being a trooper and going out there and working, just waiting for Rikidozan to return so he could quit right in his face?
It could easily be that. He could also just be a nice guy and say, these guys need to live. They need to survive. I'll stick around until Rikidozan gets back. Once Rikidozan's back, I don't have to worry about the other boys because, I will have done what I could. But I didn't want to leave them high and dry.
Right. I totally feel that. That's part of what I was trying to get at, because obviously we're going to see what he does for them. So clearly he was in this for the boys. He was just trying to make sure he could do whatever he could do on his end to make sure everybody else could, I don't want to say thrive because they don't, but at least they had a job.
Yeah, and we get to December 26th, which is another live broadcast on TV. And Michiaki Yoshimura is in the main event again, but this time he's not wrestling Yoshino Sato. He's wrestling Nagasawa. So this seems like Rikidozan would have reached out. I'm sorry, did I say Azumafuji? I meant to say. Mm-hmm. Reach out to Azumafuji and say, hey, we really could use you on TV. And he's saying, no thanks. So I imagine by this point, Rikidozan knows something's up. For the main event on that television episode, Rikidozan and Toyombori would again wrestle and defeat Stanley Kowalski and Tiny Mills, which would be the last television episode of the year. And this is where we get into kind of the showdown between Rikidozan and the boys, who have not been paid what they were owed for quite a while now.
Mm-hmm.
So when he does return to Japan, Rikidozan, Azumafuji is the appointed leader of the JWA wrestlers who have been starved for money. And he personally negotiated their wage claim with Rikidozan. So he was kind of like the union steward fighting for the boys. And he was a good-natured wrestler, and he was reported to have lent his money to the young wrestlers, even though Azumafuji himself wasn't paid well. So he was giving and lending him money just so these guys could survive. Azumafuji's discussion with Rikidozan led nowhere, as he was taken in by Rikidozan's smooth talk, which is an important aspect of Rikidozan. Being a tough guy.
Lots of Paul Heyman stuff going on here. The shady business practices, the not paying your guys, the smooth talk.
Exactly. And being a tough guy, being a good wrestler, being a charismatic wrestler, those are all important things and useful. But the smooth talk is what got most of Rikidozan's work done for him, in my opinion.
Right.
Because that's the guy who can make he can make deals happen. And that's how he spread out all of his different business ventures. So Rikidozan is sucking in Azumafuji and trying to talk him into saying everything's okay. And realizing things were never going to change, Azumafuji made the decision to end his short career as an American-style pro wrestler. He had been contemplating retirement from pro wrestling for a while and finally made up his mind that he would. It was obvious to him that there wasn't room for two great ex-sumo stars to coexist in the promotion. I think that's a bit much. I don't think it has anything to do with jealousy, and more like, what is this crap show where we're wrestling and these guys aren't getting paid, and how can they eat?
Right.
And this is not what I signed up for. So the story follows or continues saying there seems to be two sides to that story. One of the JWA wrestlers, Mid-Carter Surigami, said, I thought Azumafuji was our leader in the negotiations, but I realized he betrayed us after all. He received pretty much money from Rikidozan and gave up persuading him to pay us enough.
So basically, Azumafuji got paid off, left the business, in Surigami's belief anyway.
Yep, and that would make sense for a guy like Surigami, who is, I wouldn't say he's an undercarder, because he was right up there. He was one of the guys
champion,
getting
right?
pushed. Correct. But the fact that the negotiations ended without all the boys being paid, I mean, I think it's fair for them to guess, well, maybe Rikidozan just paid off one guy. And he paid off Azumafuji to say
always
negotiations
possible,
are over.
Because I would want my money back. So it's always possible. But is he paying him off or is he paying him back? Because remember, Azumafuji, by all accounts, was loaning money out to these other guys. So he was owed all sorts of money. So he might have just gotten what was coming to him at the same time. I mean, anybody who's just in it for themselves and is going to just take the money and run, they're not going to loan it out first and hope that they might see the money again. So I feel like maybe some sour grapes there from Surigami, but I don't know. I wasn't there.
That's true. I could easily see him saying, I know this isn't going to work out, but I would at least like to get this much money because this is what I've been loaning out to these other wrestlers to keep them alive. So at least pay me that much. And then I'm just going to walk away from this whole thing because there's no talking to you. You're not going to treat these guys right.
And I also get where Surigami's coming from in regards to Azumafuji got his money back and he left. He was supposed to be our leader and continue to negotiate for us. But once he got paid off, he just went home. And we just got to, basically what my takeaway is they never really got the money they were owed.
That's what I'm getting out of this too. So you can blame it on Azumafuji, but if you can't get blood from a stone,
right?
And if Azumafuji can't negotiate to get money from Rikidozan, which other of these guys is going to be able to do it? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Who else is going to have the cachet to say you need to pay these guys? Nobody is. So they took their shot. Rikidozan was having none of it. And what can you do? So you can blame him, Azumafuji, for not being a better negotiator, but that's the only blame you could assign him. But how are you going to get anything from Rikidozan? He is not. Azumafuji is not the only guy Rikidozan kind of screwed over, if you know what I mean.
No, yeah, and I see as it continues on here, a couple paragraphs left. The very next paragraph reads, having received his personal recompense from Rikidozan, Azumafuji no longer pursued the matter and left his fellow wrestlers to fend for themselves.
Ouch, that stings. I feel like that was written by somebody who had an axe to grind against Azumafuji. Yeah, you think? And then Azumafuji didn't last long, though. When he realized the limits of his physical abilities, he decided to end his career and pursue other interests. Again, saying he couldn't hack it in wrestling. I venture to doubt that. I think he just saw that this was not a stable business, and being a star sumo guy just a couple of years ago meant he probably had other options. And he's like, I would rather have a steady paycheck than deal with this craziness of being a TV star.
Seems like everybody Rikidozan's tried to push is getting over. It's working. It's simply the fact that they're basically being groomed and the fans are eating into it. But also, he's got the background. Azumafuji has the background as a sumo, so the fans know him from that as well. So I think he's like instant credibility as he walks into wrestling here. So I'm agreeing with you. I'm thinking, it could have worked at least for a little while longer, but maybe, just kind of got sick of the whole thing.
That's true. And Azumafuji did have a soft landing spot because newspapers said that Azumafuji decided to retire because he suffered a hairline fracture in his elbow when he slipped and fell in a bathroom. Fortunately, a new TV company, Fuji Television, this is 1958 now, an affiliate of the Sankai Shimbun Group, employed the former Yokozuna as a commentator for its sumo broadcast program. So there's Azumafuji with regular work. He says, this wrestling thing is crazy. Maybe I'll go to sumo where it's highly respected and very stable.
And that's where he came from. He knew sumo, so that's great that he was able to fall back on something fairly quickly. Everything
we've read, he seems like a nice guy.
Yeah.
And he showed up. Talk about a quick turn. It's almost like the plot of some crazy spy movie where he's sent in as the secret agent to finally knock Rikidozan down a couple pegs, and he ends up becoming friends with him. It's like a guy in the behind who you can't see his face, but he's always petting a cat, and he's just going, next time, Gadget, next time.
Next time.
And,
exactly.
Exactly. So that's all we have for 1958. We ran out of things to talk about.
I do apologize. I didn't scroll through the box of results you had at the bottom of this until now, and I questioned what Rikidozan was doing for that month period when he went to Brazil and then wrestled at the beginning of December, and now I see he was wrestling all along in Brazil. I see there's multiple results here you have during his time in Brazil, so that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, I didn't want to claim that they were real matches because the verbiage of my notes said that he was just kind of doing showcase stuff in different towns all around Brazil. But
I do know Mario de Souza, and I do know Johnny Costas, so I'm sure at least some of these were some fun wrestling matches.
So he was able to put on a show or possibly make more money, so he could bring in the massive 2 Gaijin that came in for that final November tour, November into December.
He ain't paying nobody back, man. Not with that money.
Oh gosh! And the thing is, if he wasn't moving in so many other directions, and let's remember, ladies and gentlemen, you have a number 1 star of a promotion taking profits from the wrestling promotion and investing it into other business opportunities, and he goes to Brazil. Trust me, remember these tidbits. You are going to see a shuffled version of these words thrown at you in 1982 or 1983, and a lot of things are going to become clear that what is old is new again. And I'm just going to leave that out there. That's a little bit of foreshadowing, but you're going to get to it and you're going to go, oh, that's what he was talking about. There are some things that never, ever change.
Well, I do, before we close out the show, I do still want to hit on what we got upcoming are some of our plans for Patreon. But right now, Dan, this tour actually doesn't conclude until January 23rd. I'm not sure how close you have the 1959 file to your person right now, but if you have it available, I was going to try to scroll through the rest of this tour here.
Sure, let's go right ahead. I have it up here. I'm pulling up to the top. January 9th, I have is the first show for the January tour, or the continuation of the November tour into January 1959. I've got it. So let's move on. This one has an Asian. Hey, they brought back the Asian heavyweight title. Rikidozan defeats Tiny Mills. Toyombori defeats Stanley Kowalski. And we have a bunch of undercard folk. But there is an undercard folk that we'll all know, and I think I brought this up a year ago.
I see him.
Kanji Higuchi, otherwise known as Joe Higuchi, famous referee for All Japan.
Very cool to see Joe Higuchi getting some work here. He didn't win, but that's probably why he becomes a referee.
Yep, and this match didn't make TV, unfortunately for him. Only the top 2 matches did on this episode, which was the Toyombori versus Kowalski match and the Rikidozan versus Tiny Mills match, were the 2 televised matches on Friday, January 9th.
Following day, we have a tag team title match. We didn't even have one, I don't believe, at all in 1958. Looks like we got a tag title match here in January 59.
Yeah, this is very aggressive. There's lots of title matches going on here.
I love that Rikidozan goes out of his way to defeat Thesz for the international title, but here in January 59, he's defending the Asian title. I guess there's like that rule, it's like 30 days in the States, must be like 3 years in Japan. You have to defend your title.
Yep, that is true. There is no time limit, I guess, in Japan. So for January 10th in Utsunomiya, there is a Hawaiian tag team title match. Sure, we all knew this, that the current Hawaiian tag title holders were Stanley Kowalski and Tiny Mills. Didn't you know that?
Absolutely.
Well, gosh,
everybody
gosh darn it. Rikidozan and Toyombori beat them, so now they just won the Hawaiian tag titles.
Is any of our listeners out there keeping score of how many titles Rikidozan owns by this point?
He's got to look like Ultimo Dragon with the J crown with all the titles, the ultimate 8 titles.
Well, he's the champion of 8 titles. He doesn't own any of them, remember?
That's true. He can't afford to buy the belts from the people who bought. Oh my gosh, it's so strange. All right, let's see what else we have. January 21st, February 6th. I've got as a match. I believe that's the next one. It's the live broadcast of TV. Here's a benefit: when we have TV every other week, even if the results are poor or non-existent, we have the TV results. So that at least gives us a match or 2 from a card that we might not have any other information on. So thank goodness for television. February 6th, this one was in Korakuen Gymnasium. And we've got 2 more matches here. Yoshimura versus Yusuf Turk and Rikidozan versus Lucky Semenovic. And that day, the program name is called Pro Wrestling Broadcast. I think that's the first time it's called something other than Pro Wrestling Hour or Fight Men Hour.
You know, before we go too far, Dan, I got to go back just real quick because I did a little digging here while you were going over some of those notes. Believe it or not, the real-life Hawaii Tag Team titles were indeed on the line in that match. It wasn't just a gimmick title there that they just randomly mentioned for the first time in this entire tour. The Murder Incorporated, Tiny Mills and Stan Kowalski were indeed legitimately the Hawaiian Tag Team champions, and they legitimately lost the tag team titles. However, in my notes, it claims, and it does say it took place January 10th in Japan, but it says here in my notes that it was Rikidozan and Endo who won the titles, which is odd. That could be a typo because I don't see Endo on this tour. Yeah, I don't see Endo on this tour, so very well could have been Tayanobori, like we said here, Rikidozan, Tayanobori over Kowalski and Mills, but it is a fact, an actual title change, and they're going to hold the belts until April.
That's crazy. I'm just looking at it now. Yeah, I don't see Endo anywhere around here because remember, Endo was the number 3 guy forever, right?
Yeah, I just feel like this is a typo with Endo.
Yeah, and he's probably still in Hawaii.
Hawaii, right.
We don't have any results after February 6th. And in fact, the next TV episode features nothing that's new. It aired on February 20th from 8 to 9, and it was just titled World Champion Rikidozan. It was filmed footage, special international pro wrestling matches, Sharp Brothers versus Rikidozan, and Lou Thesz versus Rikidozan. And I believe that is the October 7th match that didn't originally air on TV, but was filmed for release and shows up here.
Now that's how you get over, man, doing a Sharp Brothers match and the Thesz match.
Yep, that's a greatest hits match or a special match just to bide time before we get to what I believe should be the end of the tour. I'm scrolling.
The tour ended in January 23rd, I believe. So we're outside of the tour now. We've made it another full year and then a little here this week on the program, and we're already set up for next episode. We're going to get to see the debut of Mr. Atomic, the masked Mr. Atomic. Who is that masked man? You guys will have to wait until the next episode to find out, or Google it, whatever you want to do. Also, the very first color episode of Japanese Professional Wrestling will air here, I believe, in April of 1959. And if that isn't enough, the first annual World League Tournament coming up. As you were talking about that during the Thesz instance, and Rikidozan winning the international title and promising in letters from afar that he would come back and he would create this World League Tournament. And it is coming here in 1959.
And I'll be darned if all the promises Rikidozan made, he kept this promise. And when he was writing those letters last year, he was right. And we'll go into it about the success of these World League tournaments that he would run beginning in 1959. You can almost have a full episode about the significance of these World Leagues and how it mattered and the amount of high-profile Gaijin that were brought in, outsiders brought in. But just let it be known that 1959 is going to be an exciting year for Rikidozan for a number of reasons. And the World League is one of the major points that we're going to get to talk about on next week's episode.
Oh, man, I'm looking forward to it because we're really getting into some things and we're not too far away from the guys that, the common fans are familiar with, Inoki, Baba, not too far away from breaking into the business. So we're getting there, guys, very, very soon. Lots to go into here, 1959. Again, head over to Patreon, grab those insanely detailed show notes that I'll co-sign. Dan put in the hell of a lot of work on them. I added my notes at the end, so you guys go check those out for sure. But just looking at everything here, moving it, looks like another fun episode coming up.
Yeah, it's going to be fun because a lot of times on these house shows, they're either incomplete or they seem to go nowhere. There's no cogent booking storyline that we can see, no one moving up or moving down. But with a World League tournament, tournaments matter. The G1 in New Japan matters. The Champion Carnival in All Japan matters. Tournaments matter, and it all starts with this in 1959. This is the genesis of all of those tournaments that we enjoy today in Japanese professional wrestling.
Pretty damn cool. I can't wait to get to it. I'm excited, man. And I'm looking forward to that. We're going to be getting there, guys. Next week, we're back in action. Again, the notes are, Dan's worked very hard to get all these notes together and make them as accurate as possible. And so we can tell the story as deeply as we can. And of course, new news always pops up, so we can revisit this down the line as well. But before we close up shop here, I just want to encourage everybody again to head over to Patreon for a very different reason, not just the show notes, not just to follow along and read some of these results and all the other good stuff you have written here in these notes, Dan, but very soon, very, very soon, we're going to be introducing the Puro Academy VIP videocasts. And you guys have probably seen me and guys like Gene Jackson do some videocasts for some of your other favorite events, but we're going to be strictly Japanese wrestling history. We're going to be deep diving into many, many, many classic matches. You guys are going to enjoy it, and Dan's going to bring the context. He's going to bring the play-by-play, and I'll bring some color, and we'll have a fun time.
I cannot wait for this. This is the funnest part of it. We can talk about it all you want, but when you watch the action in the ring and have that context on who the wrestlers are and what their backstory is and what this would lead to that in regards to the match results, it's a totally different experience. If you've previously been put off by Japanese professional wrestling because of the language barrier, fear not. We are here to break through that barrier, and we can bring a whole new world of enjoyment to you if you are previously uninclined to watch Japanese pro wrestling. If you already like Japanese pro wrestling, wait till you get a load of this. It's a lot different with American commentary, and I'm no Kevin Kelly. And I say that because I'm no Kevin Kelly. I've been doing this a long time. The first show that I did commentary on Japanese professional wrestling was in the year 2000, almost a quarter century ago. I did it for a long time. In the year 2000. As Arn Anderson might say, not to toot my own horn, but toot toot.
Yeah, Dan's
been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and I can't wait to restart this up. And I'm going to have a lot of fun, and you're going to have a lot of fun. It's going to be interactive. We've got matches we're picking out because we think you'll like them. But as we serve the fans, if you have a specific request, do not hesitate. Let us know what you're looking for, what you want, and we'll work those requests in. I've got a zillion wrestling matches from Japan that are available to me in my archives, so I'd much rather give you guys something you actually want instead of me just randomly picking stuff we think you might like.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Dan, the Puroresu man. I mean, if it's out there, you likely have it, and we can cover it to some degree, guys. So we're going to be making some polls on Patreon as well. Going to ask the users what they really want us to cover, but we have some ideas of what we're going to do. We're not going to let the cat out of the bag just yet, but stay tuned very soon. You guys are not going to be disappointed. And as you said, Dan, I know so many people over the years that have made those comments that I try to watch Japanese wrestling, but I just can't get into it because I can't get over the commentary. I need commentary, or I just can't take the Japanese commentary because I don't know what they're saying. And this is going to eliminate all of that because you guys are going to get English commentary, and Dan's going to give it some context, the backstory to a lot of these guys, a lot of the matches, and things like that. So it's really going to add so much more to an already great wrestling match.
That is true. We've got decades and decades of footage. We have footage all the way back to the 50s, late 60s. But when the 70s hit, that's when the volume of video footage skyrockets from New Japan, All Japan, JWA, IWE, All Japan Women from 1978. I have a lot of footage, and we have a lot that we can cover. The world is your oyster. You just let us know what you're interested in. You might have heard about somebody or heard about a promotion. We've got it, and we can show you we can show it to you. We can do the commentary on the match. We can profile what you're casually interested in or even just curious about.
Complete years or near complete years of TV from the 1970s, guys. Rare handhelds that you can count on one hand. How many people have even seen it in the world? And we got it right here, and it's going to be at our fingertips thanks to Dan, and I can't wait to dive into some of this stuff very, very soon. Stay tuned. More information on that on the way. You guys can DM me or send me an email, and we'll talk a little bit more about this off air. But right now, Dan, we're going to wrap things up. Again, 1959, we already kicked it off. We looked at January, but so much more to come. Looking forward to the World League and Mr. Atomic. Stay tuned for that, guys. We're going to talk about that and so much more next time around. Dan, thanks so much once again.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, class is dismissed.